Greetings, this is Jim Lindsay. This is a lesson for CIS 141 over Chapter 9 from the textbook. Before we get into the meat of this lesson, I wanted to show you some stuff on Blackboard that you might find helpful. So I'm going to switch over to Blackboard. Okay, this is the Blackboard site, and you're watching this lesson right here. If you'd like these slides, and there are a lot of really good notes and a lot of really good hyperlinks in the note sections and on the slides themselves, you can get this presentation from the Blackboard site. So feel free to download this presentation and use it as you study and even as you watch this lesson. All right, so here's what we're going to be talking about. We're not going to talk about everything in the chapter. This is a really important chapter, and it's also a very big chapter. I mean, it's the content that's presented here. It can make up an entire course just by itself. I know that sounds like I'm exaggerating it, but it's not. I mean, we have people that are security specialists, and like this stuff that you're learning about in this is what they do 24 hours, or every day at work all year. They're doing security stuff. So this is very timely, very important material, and we're sort of scratching the surface here. So I'm going to talk about certain aspects of things that are presented in this chapter, but I won't talk about all of them. So to begin with, let's just talk about why should you be concerned? Why is this important? Well, I wanted to flip over to a website, and I have a screenshot of the website right here, but I'm going to actually flip over to that page very quickly and just show you just a couple of stories listed on this ARS Technica site, and I think I've showed it to you before. This is one of my favorite websites to look at on a regular basis, but I'll meet you at my browser in just a moment. Okay, I'm using Internet Explorer, and I'm at arstechnica.com/security. If you're at the ARS Technica home site, which is right here, the home page, they have a drop-down menu right here for the main menu. If you go to the security section, it talks about security and hacktivism, risk assessment. You look at this page right here, the picture, the advertisement pops up right there. But every single one of these news stories is about hacking. It's about security flaws. It's about cyber crimes that have occurred, this week, and it's really concerning. You look at like this July 12th, July 11th, July 10th, and so every day of the week there's news coming out about stuff that is significant, and people are being financially injured as a result of a lot of these things, or security of nation states, security of firms, companies are being breached on a regular basis. And so if you're interested in information technology, this whole area of information security is very wide open. You could pursue it in the civilian sector. You can pursue it in the government sector. There's news of just a couple of weeks ago. There was news about this OPM hack right here, where this is the Office of Personnel Management, and the federal government's human resource branch is this OPM, and so there's speculation that attack on the OPM was made by the nation state of China, or at least hacking groups housed within China. And so you're talking about Tom Clancy kind of stuff, where this nation and that nation are attacking one another electronically, just like they would have militarily, decades ago. So this stuff is very current, very timely. Let me flip on back to the presentation real quickly. So this site is out there for you to peruse. I hope you'll look at it. It every day they're putting a lot of really interesting, good information out that I think you'll find use for. So in addition to the sheer amount of stuff that's coming out in the news about risk assessments and hacking. Just a personal note, the Anthem insurance carrier is the company that basically does all the health insurance for Western Kentucky University employees and faculty and staff. And so in January of this last year, January of 2015, somebody breached the Anthem database of users, and they were able to capture social security numbers, private information about people's medical histories, their financial information, etc. And with that, they then went out and they basically committed identity theft crimes. There were a number of people that work at Western who had I personally wasn't included, thank goodness, but some of the people in my department, other people filed their tax refund on their behalf trying to steal their tax refunds. And so that's right here at the university, and that wasn't through any fault of anybody at WKU. It's just our insurance, our business partner Anthem, somebody breached their security, and this thing went all the way back to I think like 2004. So if you've been with Anthem since 2004, your information potentially was at risk. And so this stuff is happening. I've already mentioned the Office of Personnel Management breach, which occurred not too long ago, and the same sort of thing happened there. Basically, the people that got into the database of user information at the Office of Personnel Management stole social security numbers, address information, and all that sorts of stuff, so they could then go out and do what they want to with it. And the thing that is really kind of concerning with that one is that with the OPM attack, you have like law enforcement officers, you have soldiers, you have I think the soldiers probably are housed in a different database with the military, with the Department of Defense, but think about like FBI, U.S. Marshals, ATF, those kind of guys. They probably don't want their address information out there, period, because there may be bad guys looking to exact revenge on them, and if for the right price, I'm sure the people that stole it would be willing to sell it, and then their address information has been compromised. And so why should you care about this? Well, you should care about this because I'm sure you're going to be using electronic means to pay for things, to get paid from work, to file your taxes, etc. And as a result of that, you're going to be vulnerable to these sorts of attacks as well. And if those occur, how do you protect yourself? And so that's what we're talking about. That's why this whole topic is of interest. So what's cool about this chapter, especially this chapter, I think, this one, and I think it's like chapter 15 where it goes into another aspect. Yeah, computer security and privacy is chapter 15. Both of these security chapters do a really good job where they tell you about a specific kind of threat, and then they give you advice on how to mitigate those sorts of attacks. And so they inform you about the threat, and then they tell you how to protect yourself as well as possible. And so the first area that they talk about in this chapter is they talk about unauthorized access and unauthorized use. What is that? And so as you read through this chapter, the things that I wanted to point out to you were the main things from this particular component of it, or this category of it, unauthorized access and unauthorized use, are the following. It talks about hacking and what is hacking. To try and help you remember this, I put a picture of Chris Hemsworth from the recent movie Black Hat. That was a movie about computer hacking. Maybe this will help you remember this, but hacking is defined as, in your textbook, as the act of breaking into a computer or a network. So basically breaking into a computer or a network. If you watch that movie, you'll see that whole sort of thing go on. And this is what's happened with, when I told you about the Anthem, Blue Cross, Blue Shield, and the OPM examples. Somebody hacked into those networks basically through a computer network. They were able to infiltrate the security of those databases and then get data that they were able then to use in a malicious way. That's hacking. And so that's the first sort of threat that's described in this particular part of the chapter. And we'll talk about ways to protect yourself from this as well as possible in just a moment. The next one that's mentioned that I want to talk about with you is something called Wi-Fi piggybacking. It talks about this under a section called like war driving and Wi-Fi piggybacking. War driving is not something I don't care whether you learn about that or not. It's basically what that is. That's driving around with your wireless device, seeing if you can see what networks are available and then use them. That's what war driving is. And with our phones, with our smartphones being basically wireless devices, everywhere you walk, you could war drive or you could war walk. But what's I do want you to know about is basically Wi-Fi piggybacking. That's when somebody uses your Wi-Fi connection to your computer, your internet service provider, without telling you and without paying you for it. And so, people using your internet connection without your permission is Wi-Fi piggybacking. So, we want to talk about ways to mitigate, those sorts of threats. The third one I want to talk to you about is something called, the interception of communication. And that's where people have software and devices and hardware in place so that they can, as packets of information are sent back and forth wirelessly, if they're not encrypted, they can potentially intercept that data, look at it, and then use it for malicious purposes. And I'll talk to you about that in a moment. In a specific example of that. And then we'll talk about ways to try and protect yourself as much as possible. Okay, so those are the main threats that I wanted to point out. There are others that are mentioned, but those are the main ones I wanted to point out to you, at least at this point. And so how would you protect yourself? And I have a picture of a guy there. To me, he looks like a bouncer. I was looking for, this looks like a big guy standing at the door, and if you wanted to get into that particular establishment, I think you'd have to, get his permission. I don't think I'm going to get by that guy. And so, how can you best protect yourself against unauthorized access and unauthorized use? Well, the authors of the text recommend to you that you use possessed knowledge access systems, possessed object access systems, or a biometric access system, or something called a two-factor authentication, which is essentially using two or more of these. And they're almost always going to include a possessed knowledge access system. Possessed knowledge systems, these PKA systems, are essentially passwords. So a password in conjunction with a possessed object or with a biometric control, those are great. That's what it's talking about with two-factor authentication. So by having this sort of system in place, either one of these or with two-factor, two of these, you're going to really cut down on the number of people that can, use your stuff or access your stuff without your permission. So let's take a look at these three right here, at least some of these two, in some detail. Okay, first let's look at passwords. And I'm not going to read these to you. You have the textbook, and you can look at these password strategies, and these are all really good. These bits of advice given to you on, when you construct a password, when you choose a password, what should it look like? Well, here's some advice for you. Read that. Take their advice. As much as possible, follow their advice. I wanted to show you a website. Looks like this, and if you download this presentation, that's actually a link to the website. But I learned about this website from a guy on the faculty named Mark Champa. And Mark Champa is he's one of our security gurus. There are a couple of guys on the staff that are on our faculty that this is kind of what they do. I mean, they're, just like if you have a security question, you go to Mark, you go to Jeff, these guys are going to know the answer. Mark has written many books about security, and so I've gone to some of his presentations at conferences and other venues, just basically to learn some stuff about security from him, as well as used his books. And so one of the things he shares with students is this thing right here, this how secure is my password site. and it's howsecureismypassword.net. It's the name of the site. Let's go ahead and jump over there, and I want to show you some things. Okay, I'm in my browser. I'm back. I'm in Internet Explorer again, and what you do with this site is you type in potential passwords, and it will give you some idea, how secure is that password. If a hacker was trying to break into your system, and that was the password that was barring their entry, how quickly could they get into your system? Well, I have a text file I'm going to pull up here, and I have a couple of different passwords here that we want to sort of test in this system. And you'll see as you look at this, it's the word tree and love squished together, tree love. I was looking for something that would be easy to remember, something that we could then sort of start to manipulate and try and make some more complicated versions of it. And so tree love fit that bill. The first one, just tree love by itself, all lowercase letters with the words right there next to each other. I'm just going to copy that and paste that into the site here and try it. And it tells me that in 52 seconds, a hacker, a bad guy, could basically figure out what my password is. Well, why is that? Well, I'm using words out of the dictionary, and if it has a software that's using dictionaries to crack my password, this is going to come up really quickly. And so that tree love, all lower cases, are really probably not a great choice. Now, what if I take the first and the last letters and just capitalize those? Does that help me any? Well, yes, it does. So I'm going to take these, this version of it, put it in here. So this is tree love with a capital T and a capital E at the end of it. And now I've basically jumped up to 3 hours. It's going to take the guys a little bit longer simply by inserting a capital letter, in at the beginning and the end of my password. Well, that's still not very good. I don't know about you, but I don't want somebody breaking into my stuff at all. 3 hours, I'm not happy with that. So what if you took your password, and instead of using like these vowels E, what if I use the number 3? I know it doesn't look like a letter E, but if I consistently use the number 3 for letter E, then I can start to come up with something that has numbers in it. And instead of the letter O, if I use the @ sign, what if I did that? Because it looks kind of like an O on the outside. So I'm going to take this version right here, and I'm going to put it in the system and see what it does. And let me make sure I got the right one. Hang on. Yeah, and that was the right one, and still didn't really help that much. But what if I do this? What if I take a capital T and put that in there as opposed to lowercase t? See if that helps any. And we're up to 3 days. And so I've gone from 52 seconds to 3 days. Now, you can make one that's much, much better than this. And basically what I want you to see is that the length of the password can really, really, really help you get a more secure password. And it doesn't have to be hard. I know that when you're thinking about passwords, I have so many passwords to know. I just want it to be a short, easy password. Well, check this out. Let me jump back to PowerPoint real quickly. I'll be right back to you. Okay, I'm in the presentation. Let me jump to my next slide. Okay, check this out. I also got this from Mark. Now, let's say we had a really weird keyboard for our computer. It only had 3 keys. It has the letter A, letter B, and letter C. And forgive my slide here. Basically, I wrote on a piece of paper with a pencil, and then I took a picture with my phone, emailed it to myself, and I've incorporated those pictures into this. This is really fun to do on a blackboard or a whiteboard in front of a class, but trying to do that same thing with an online class, it was sort of challenging, so I did it this way. But we have a 3-key keyboard, and our task is basically to come up with a 2-letter password using these 3 keys. So what are our opportunities? What possibilities can we possibly come up with if we have these 3 letters and we have to have a 2-letter password? Well, the answer is this. You're either going to have an AA, an AB, an AC, or these things listed right here. There's 9 possible passwords that you can have using these 3 keys, coming up with a 2-letter password. And so If you look at that and try to figure out the math, basically here's the formula for it. You take the number of keys in that keyboard or on that keyboard, you raise it to the power of the length of the password, and that gives you the total number of possibilities. So in this case, we had 3 keys with a 2-letter password length, so it gave us 9 possible outcomes. Well, what if we made the password 3 characters or 4 characters or 5 characters? You'll see the number of possibilities exponentially starts to grow, right? So what I would suggest to you is use these tips right here to basically come up with a password. Okay, find like some sort of password, and it doesn't, they're telling you to be at least 8 characters. Let's say you can come up with 6 that you can remember. But then what you do, I would submit to you, double it. Take what you've done, with the 6 or the 8 characters, and then double it up. And let me show you how that's going to work with our tester when we go back to that website. Let's jump back to that website real quickly. Where'd it go? Here we are. So let me pull up my text file again. So let me scroll on down here again. So tree love again is our password we're testing out, right? So what if we try this, tree love, tree love? So we take tree love, copy that. It's just the straight text version of it, tree love, put that in here, and that jumps to 345,000 years. I'm okay with that. That's a pretty good password. What if we took that version right here, where basically we're using the 3s for the E's, a 1 for an L, and its @ for the O? What if we took that one and doubled it up? What's the duration going to be for someone to crack that one? Well, that one's going to be even better. It's become 12 trillion years. And again, that's a really good password, and it's not a hard password to remember necessarily. It's basically tree love. I'm just using those digits, right, instead of the characters. So try that. Here's one more for you. And your book recommends to possibly use a phrase. I'm sure you've heard this phrase before, 4 years ago. That obviously is coming from the Gettysburg Address. Abraham Lincoln made that really famous speech, right? What if you use this password right here? And again, it's using 4, the number, and then score, and 7 years ago. I'm going to take this guy, try him out. How good is that one? 16 billion years. I can live with that. And so what I hope you'll take away from this chapter is that you can construct passwords that are something you can remember, and they're not terribly cumbersome. If you threw in some capital letters in with this guy, that make it even better. Ideally, what you'd want to use, actually use something called a password vault. I'm not going to show that to you here. You can read about it in your textbook, or you can just get on YouTube and do password vault and check out some of the programs that are available. But there's free software which will basically create a new password for you for every single site you need. So you'd have a Gmail password, you'd have a WKU password, you'd have a Blackboard password or a TopNet password, whatever you want. You can come up with these different passwords using the password vault, and the only password that you have to remember is the one to get into the vault. And you basically carry around a USB thumb drive. That's how this thing works. And so again, I've learned about that from Champa as well. So check those things out. I think that you'll get a lot at a bare minimum. You'll get a lot of really good information that I think can help you stay a little bit safer as you use computers. All right, I'm back in the presentation here. The next recommendation to use something called a possessed object to gain access to your system. And a possessed object is exactly what it sounds like. It's some sort of badge, some sort of RFID device, some sort of keychain, which is going to randomly generate codes, and that's synced up with some server somewhere. And what you have to do is, in order to log into something or access something, you have to have that device. And so, think about, like in this case, you have this door. This door lock is not going to open up unless you have the, in this case, on the phone, there's actually something within the phone that's going to be sensed by the sensor right here, and then unlock the door so you can get in. In this case, the guy has a smart card which is kind of like a credit card, and it's just got some circuitry in there which lets it basically act like a computer deal. But the smart card can be read by the computer to gain, so the guy can gain access to it. So that's a possessed object. One of the things we've used in jobs I've had, we had RSA is a security company, and we used RSA a lot. But basically, we had these keychains. They look like key fobs for your cars, for the keys for your car. You'd carry around this, your keys on it, and when you wanted to log into the system, it would ask you to not only for your username and password, but then once you got to this other login screen, you had to tell it what the code was off your RSA key fob, and you'd click a button, and the thing was synced up with an RSA server that we had, and your code that it would generate, it would show on the little screen of the key fob was only good for 30 seconds, and so and we had to keep all of this, we had to maintain all this stuff. It wasn't easy, but it was secure, and so they'd press their button under a keychain, they'd type in the code they saw right there, and as long as it was in the 30 seconds and it was a good code, they could then get into our systems and start to do things with it. And those were at law firms. I mean, we're talking about at a defense law firm in particular where we used that they had really high dollar clients. They were doing like corporate defense work that were worth millions and millions of dollars in cases, and so they had the money to spend on that sort of security stuff. But if you get a high security job or a high dollar job, they may require that sort of work from you as well. So possessed object access systems, that's what we're talking about. Now, the last thing they talk about in that section is your biometric access controls or systems. You know what those are. When we talked about Chapter 4, we talked about biometrics in detail, but facial recognition systems and fingerprints and so on. So these sort of systems, biometric access systems and possessed objects in combination with a password system, is called two-factor authentication. That's a really strong system. So by using those, you can really restrict who's going to get access and who's going to get to use your stuff. Okay, next let's talk about something that's also part of this chapter. That's basically securing your wireless router. And I can't overemphasize the importance of this. If you have a Wi-Fi router in your apartment or your dormitory or your house, you need to secure it. And it's real easy to do. All you have to do, just get on YouTube and type in secure a D-Link router, secure a Belkin router, secure a Netgear router, and you're going to come up. People make videos about this stuff all the time, and they're current, they're up to date, and they'll show you how to basically get in here and take your router and configure it so that your neighbors can't war drive on it. They can't Wi-Fi piggyback on it because you've basically taken the router and configured it so that they either can't see it at all, or if they can see it, it requires a password, or even if they can see it, if you're using this MAC filtering, you've told the router the only devices that are allowed to it's the only devices it's allowed to talk to, and all of this stuff is really easy. You can do this literally in minutes, but all you have to do is log into your router and just go through the configuration process. In 15 minutes you can be 100 times more secure than you were before you started. And that's and why is that important? Well, this is why it's important. I'll give you an example from my life. I live in a house now that we're in a subdivision, and houses are, you can see the other houses, and they're pretty close. And when I turn on a laptop, I can see my neighbors, wireless networks and so on. So obviously I'm doing it here, but while we were building this house, I was living out in the country, and I was way out in the country. There was I had cows across the street. I had a chicken farm over on one side, had cows on another. It was the country, and I had two neighbors, and because I was out in the country and I basically got lazy and I wasn't going to live there very long, I did not secure my router. And this is a great lesson because basically one of my neighbors got on there and started using a bunch of BitTorrent stuff and downloaded a whole bunch of copyrighted stuff. And as a result of that, Insight, my cable company, cut me off. And I lost, and I was teaching at the time. It was a summer. It's like, oh my God, I can't do my job. And I had to, started having to come back to work. And what happened was I had to go in there. I had two neighbors. Had a 50-50 shot. I never went and confronted anybody about it. But one of my neighbors was basically jumping on my wireless connection through Wi-Fi and downloading this stuff. And as a result of that, Insight kicked me off. And so that's why it's important, because people will do that. And if they do something that's illegal, then you will be held responsible. It could have been a lot worse. They could have been doing like child porn or something like that. And then I would have had to have the cops show up at my house and that's a felony right there. And so this is something that you need to be concerned about. Okay, so you get 5 more pieces of advice on how to protect yourself from unauthorized access and use in this chapter. And I'm not going to spend a bunch of time talking about those. I want you to read about it. I do want to point them out to you so you know what to look for. But it talks about using something called a firewall. And a firewall can either be a piece of hardware, a dedicated piece of hardware, or a piece of software. And in most cases, for most of us, it's going to be a piece of software. It's going to run on your desktop or your laptop computer, and it's essentially just going to run just like your antivirus software does, just like it'd be built into part of your operating system, and it's going to function kind of like a castle wall. So I've got a castle wall pictured here for you, but because we're using packet switching networks, as packets of data get sent in and out, the firewall will examine those, and it will examine, basically you'll see on this castle wall, most of it's solid, right? But it's got a couple of holes here where maybe guys could shoot arrows out of those. It has some windows right here. These would be what we'd call ports or openings. And your computer, when it's on a network, it has certain openings or certain ways that it can communicate. And so through those ports, certain sorts of data are sent using those specific ports. And so the firewall will monitor those ports for you. So if you get into information technology as a job, you'll learn about the details of that. If you're not going to get into it as a job, here's what you need to know. You need to turn your firewall on, and typically it's on by default. It's normally on. Your operating systems, every modern operating system includes a firewall. Leave the firewall on and let it do its job. But it's going to monitor that traffic and keep the bad guys from crawling in your window or do bad things to your computer by sneaking in through one of these openings. There's something called encryption. And basically, encryption is another way to protect yourself from unauthorized access or use by basically the data that you send around your network or on a network is scrambled up so only the sender and only the receiver can read it. And so I've got a picture of some pig Latin right there. He's talking about, the secret ingredient for my favorite chili recipe is described right there. But if I wanted to send that out and not let anybody be able to read it, I could send it in a scrambled up way, like using like pig Latin. So if somebody just ran into that and go, what is that? Well, they're not going to know that I use cinnamon in my chili recipe. That's what it tastes great. You got to try it. But that's what encryption is. You take something and scramble it up. There's lots of different ways to encrypt things. You can encrypt entire drives, hard drives, or you can use if you're just using a website and you're going to put in usernames and passwords, you want to make sure you have an HTTPS connection. You'll see this one is an HTTP. But if you use an HTTPS connection, that's the secure version of the hypertext transfer protocol. All the stuff you send back and forth is encrypted, so bad guys in the middle cannot read it. So a very prudent thing to do, make sure you use an HTTPS connection when you're using username and passwords or sending any sort of sensitive data through a network. Lastly, it talks about these virtual private networks. And essentially, we've talked about that before when we talked about computer networks, so I won't talk about it now. but that's when you have that connection back to your home office. So if you want a refresher on that, flip back to that Chapter 7 lecture where we talked about virtual private networks. But you create that encrypted tunnel over which your data is sent back and forth. All right, I told you there were 5 more. That's 3 of the 5. The 4th one is basically this. It talks about steps you can take if you're going to use a public hotspot. A hotspot is where you go to like Starbucks or McDonald's or WKU's campus, and they have wireless Wi-Fi access that you can use. That's a hotspot. These are really good recommendations for you. Read about these, and I recommend you follow their advice. But basically, when you're going to make a connection with a Wi-Fi connection, you'd want to do that in a more secure way than you would if you're at your corporate headquarters and you're jacking into the wall. You're going to make a hardline connection through your network interface card into the corporate connection, because at work, jacking into the wall through the Ethernet cable, you're connecting directly to your company's network. And in Wi-Fi, you're using some other guy's connection. That's where it talks about this evil twin scenario. I'll just spend a second to tell you. I went to I got to sit in on a white collar crime seminar last year, and I guess it's earlier this year. But basically, the state police were giving the training session, and the FBI guy was a guy that was giving the class, and it was all part of computer forensics. It's something I got to go to because of that. But he set up one of these evil twin situations, and what happened was he basically, in the room, he set up his devices to sniff out and look for devices that were looking for wireless connections, and then based on what they were looking for, it posed as that bad connection. It posed as that connection. So there was a guy in the room that he'd stayed at like a Holiday Inn Express, and so his device acted like it was the Holiday Inn Express Wi-Fi, because it was set up to automatically connect on the guy's laptop. It connected, and he was able to read that guy's data. And that's what it's talking about with this evil twin. So once you're done with a connection, like you go on vacation and you connect at the Holiday Inn Express or whatever it is, when you're done, delete that connection. You don't need that anymore, because things like that can happen. And so these are some really good pieces of advice to follow as far as using hotspots. Now, the last one that's recommended to you is to do a bunch of things business-wise. We talked about sensible employee precautions, where you are the employer, you're the supervisor. Is this ever going to be the case? Well, yes, because guess what? You're going to graduate from Western and you may open your own business, or you're going to graduate from Western and you're going to become a supervisor or a manager. As you manage people and hire people, these are things you need to consider. So basically, these things like have a policy in place, a policy and a control in place to where when people bring in their own phones and bring in their own laptops and that sort of stuff, is that dangerous? It's called BYOD, bring your own device. Is a BYOD kind of thing possibly negative? And yes, it is, because think about it. That guy could have that laptop at home. His kids could be jumping on the internet, playing all kinds of crazy, free games or whatever. He's not thinking about it because it keeps the kid quiet, and then he gets to work, and then he connects to the network, and then guess what? All this adware, spyware, or other malicious stuff that got on the machine because his kid used it now is attacking your network. And so all sorts of things to be thinking about. Letting employees know what they can and they can't do. It talks about this principle of least privilege, where basically, let people work with just the stuff they need to work with, but don't give them more access than they need. Because if you give somebody unrestricted access to like the entire network and they don't need it, their connection could then be used by a malicious person to mess up a whole bunch of stuff that guy doesn't even have any interest in. Or if that guy got fired, you talk about a disgruntled employee. Let's say that guy got disciplined or fired or something like that. He still has his access. His username and passwords haven't been turned off yet. He could jump in there and with that unrestricted access mess up a whole bunch of stuff. When if you use that principle of least privilege, he'd only be able to mess up his own stuff. So really good piece of advice given in that section of the text. So read over those. Let me know if you have any questions. But very sensible things that are recommended to you in that part of the text. Okay, the next part of the text is talking about computer sabotage, and I can't pass up any chance to mention the Beastie Boys. They have a great song called Sabotage. I actually put a link to this song if you want to listen to that Sabotage song a little bit later. Check it out. But this section is really short. What we can basically say is, if in this, what they're talking about is botnets and computer viruses and malware and worms and Trojan horses and this sort of stuff, denial of service attacks, and essentially all of these sorts of threats are treated the same way. And all you have to do, it's easy. All you have to do is get antivirus software. And antivirus software is free. If you're not using antivirus software, then shame on you. Turn it on today. It's usually incorporated into the operating system for free. Windows Defender is part of Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 8.1, and it works. It's great. Turn it on. What it does, it basically the malware software, it has a set of definitions, the virus definitions, that it as it looks at files, it looks for symptoms or evidence that there's a virus, that there's bad stuff in there. And so those definitions get updated as you update the software, and you should do that, have it basically set up to where it checks every day, because new viruses come out every day. But as it checks your system, if it runs into a signature, or basically it finds a pattern that matches the bad pattern, it can stop it, it can quarantine it, it can delete it. So, and you can put it on your mobile devices too. And so computer sabotage is really easy to take care of. Just essentially get antivirus or anti-malware software, put it on your computer, and let it run and update it. That's I used to make a big part of my living fixing this back when I was working with those law firms, because this antivirus stuff was not something that was built into the systems. You had to buy it, and you had to manage it, you had to update it, you had to push the updates out. I mean, it was really important, because think about it, if you're an attorney and you're charging somebody $250 an hour to do work for them, and your computer breaks, what kind of work can you do? Well, you can't do a lot. And so that $250 an hour you were making, man, you're not making it now. So you got to keep that computer working, and it takes being proactive. It takes some diligence on your part, and that's all becomes so easy. And so put the malware software, anti-malware software on your machine, let it run. If you don't like the built-in stuff with Windows, like the Windows Defender, you've got the malware bytes, which we've talked about before. You have AVG, which is free. You have all the semantic stuff, all the McAfee stuff that you can get. Panda is a great one. Trend Micro is another. So just get some anti-malware software and you'll be in good shape. Okay, the next big chunk of the chapter is talking about something, I'm sure you're familiar with: online theft, fraud, other scams that people conduct to basically, do things like commit identity theft. They're trying to steal money from you. They're trying to steal data from you for blackmail and hacking and farming and all sorts of other activities. This happens more and more every day. I've got a picture on the screen of this was a funny series of commercials from Citibank, where basically this guy was the victim of identity theft, and so some teenage girl basically got him through identity theft and went out and charged a bunch of stuff. If you've never seen those commercials, I believe we've got a link to it right there. You can check that out. It's very funny. There were about a half a dozen of them, of different people that have been, had been victims of identity theft. But you can protect yourself in several different ways. And so how would you do that? So as you read through the first chunk of this where it talks about what are the threats, you're going to be reading about identity theft and phishing and farming, social media attacks. Read that information, then you get to the next chunk, and then how do you help yourself? Well, this is what you do. This is from page 378, of the textbook. You're basically protecting your private data. You're not sharing that with people that don't need it. You're shredding documents, like when you throw stuff away, like your shred receipts, shred like your tax. If you get like any sort of stuff that has your social security number or tax information on it, shred it before you put it in a trash can. All those sorts of things. Using good passwords, we've already talked about that. And so by following tips like this, you're going to cut down on the amount of threats that you face to become a victim of identity theft. Electronically, there's something called phishing that I want to make sure that you're familiar with. And I'm sure you've seen these. These are emails that come to you, which basically they're scams. They're trying to pull you in to get your username and password, because what they want to do, the people conducting the scam, is they want to get your information and then steal from you. A lot of times they'll pose as a bank, and you'll see in this one it looks like a Bank of California sending you information. And here's what I would recommend to you is just if you receive anything from a bank or anybody that's asking you to click on a link within an email and then sign in, do not do it. In fact, I would delete that email. If you are actually a customer of the Bank of California and you have a question about your account, how could you safely check your bank account information if you wanted to do it online? Well, what you should do is get rid of that email and then go to your browser and then independently open up a web page and go directly to the Bank of California web page. Because what happens is you'll see like it says sign into the online banking. That's what the link says, but when you look at that, it's actually a link to some other place. And if this picture is in the textbook. If you look in the textbook, you'll actually see this specific page, so you can look at it up close. But I mean, I do HTML stuff all the time, and I could teach you how to make a link look like one thing and then take you somewhere else. It's really easy. And then the web page where you go to, all you have to do is just basically copy the originals, their code. And so that's really easy too, because in a browser it tells you the code for whatever you're looking at. Let's jump over to browser and look at that. Okay, I'm on Western's Blackboard page. If I wanted to copy this page and make something that looked just like this, all I've got to do is go up here in my browser window, go to the tools, and then look at the source code. It's going to give me the code. I can copy that. So all I have to do is just copy this and paste it into a new HTML document. And then as long as I have the picture files, I can make a page that looks exactly like this and put it on my server. And then when you hit my page, because you're expecting it to look like this, I'll jump back to the PowerPoint presentation, but when you hit my page, you think you're in the real deal. You think you're really in Blackboard. You think you're really at Bank of California, and you're not. And then you log in with your username and password. I'm monitoring that. So as soon as you, what I can do is basically get your username and password and then maybe direct you somewhere else. And then so you'll either log in again, or I can send you actually to the real bank's website after that. But then I'm going to log in as you, and I'm going to transfer money out to myself. And so very insidious and effective way of stealing money from people. But you can prevent it just basically if you get an email from anybody that wants you to click on a link in the email and then log in somewhere, do not do it. If you actually have a question, visit the site that you're interested in directly through your browser, and then log in. So that's pretty easy to address. Here's some more information about phishing emails right here. And the reason they call it password phishing is basically it's password harvesting, and then you put that onto the word phishing there, so that's why it's called phishing. Now, the end of this little section basically finishes up with talking about other forms of scams that go on, and I've already talked about this, but basically when you connect somewhere where you're going to type in a username or password, make sure you're using the HTTPS site. And what does that look like? I'll flip back over to Blackboard again. You'll see up in here, my connection is an HTTPS connection, and in Chrome, the connection is a green padlock, and HTTPS right there is green. I know I've got a secure connection. So everything I send from my laptop to the Blackboard server is encrypted. If you're a bad guy and you intercept my stuff in the middle, you cannot read it because it's encrypted. It's scrambled up. It's in that pig Latin that we talked about earlier. And so you can't read it. Only I can read it, and only the server can read it because we have this HTTPS connection. Okay, and to finish this chapter, it talks about some personal safety issues. It talks about cyberbullying, which I'm not real worried about because you guys are adults. If you have children, some of you are parents, read that and think about that from the perspective of a parent, because that's real. I mean, you've got kids or do things. Kids are mean, just like adults, and they'll do things and say things, and they're also cowards. I mean, people are cowards, and they'll be really mean and say terrible things to people online that they wouldn't say in person, and they can just torment people. And so cyberbullying can be a really awful thing. And so as a parent, monitor what your kid's doing online, because they may be participating in that, or they may be the victim of that. And so help them navigate those waters. Those are rough. As an adult, it talks about cyber stalking, and that's something I do want you to, every college student, especially young ladies coming to college, you get all kinds of creepy dudes that could potentially want to, they have bad intent for you. And so use your computer wisely. Don't tell people where you are all the time. Don't tell them exactly where you are. Don't put apps on your phone which basically mark you and tell where you are. You've got I'm thinking like the Tinder ones and things like that, which people that use those can basically not only see your profile and stuff, but they can tell geographically where you're located. That's dumb. Look at these recommendations. They're really good recommendations on how to protect yourself. So lastly, it gets into some network and internet security legislation. I'm not going to make you guys learn about that. Basically, to sum that up, it's really hard for Congress to keep up with technology because laws typically really lag behind. And I've seen that personally is through all the computer forensic stuff. When I was really into that and teaching that and doing a lot of classes with it, we'd be trying to come up with ways to get information off of cell phones, especially lately, and in desktops and laptops of bad guys. Not me personally. I'd be the policeman that I would go and learn from. And the laws were such that everything was built on like the old file cabinet system or the old mail system or whatever. And so trying to come up with laws that would actually let them get access to things that they needed to see were really lagging. And so that list of legislation that's there is it's going up to like 2004, but as you can see there is still, it's been 11 years since then, so 12 years soon. So it's hard for electronic stuff to be legislated because we change so much. But that's that chapter. So that's the summary of what we've been talking about. I certainly appreciate your attention. This is a long chapter, but it's a really important one. So please give it as much focus as you can. It's good stuff to know. Thanks for your time and attention.